Okay, welcome everybody to the second panel of the Modern Learning Lab course. We have three great panelists here this afternoon to talk about modern learning and what they do in their everyday context and the lens they bring to it. And I'm going to let them each introduce themselves before we get started. So maybe Jamie, if you could jump in.
Sure. Hi, I'm Jamie Everett, and I am a lower school technology integrator at Park Tutor in Indianapolis. And I'm also a learning design coach for GOA.
Mike?
My name is Mike Peller. I'm the assistant head of the upper school at the Nueva School, which is in the Bay Area. Major focus of my work recently has been around Mastery Transcript Consortium and thinking about how we migrate standards-based assessment to competency-based assessment so as to kind of get to that transition to using Mastery Transcript.
Lindsay?
I'm Lindsay Owen. I run the Makerspace at the Evergreen School in Seattle, Washington. We're preschool through 8th grade. I work with every teacher in the school, every subject area to do like makery goodness.
Makery goodness. Good stuff.
Yeah, that's the technical term.
I should have introduced myself from the get-go. My name is Jason Cummings. I'm full-time with Global Online Academy, and I do faculty experience work, which is to say lots of training and onboarding and coaching of online teachers. So without further ado, I want to throw out our first question, and whoever wants to jump in can go first, and then we'll kind of go around the horn. But you all have the 6 elements of modern learning design that we have framed this course around in front of you. And I don't need to repeat them because I know the people who are participating in the course have them in various places. But which of those resonates most with you in the work that you do? And feel free to take it wherever you want.
Happy to jump in and start. I really enjoyed looking at the design of these 6, in particular, being asked as questions rather than as statements. So my first sort of takeaway was, oh, this is really beautiful. We just had Warren Berger come and speak to our school, who wrote the book, The More Beautiful Question, and he sort of threw out this idea of, like, what if schools as mission statements it was full of questions and not statements. So I guess for me, they're all very important, but what strikes me as most important, or where my kind of where I put my attention first, is thinking about developing a student-centered learning environment. In part because I think people are naturally curious, and unfortunately, I think oftentimes curiosity is something that schools unteach. I have the privilege of having a 2-year-old right now, and it's actually greatly informing the way that I think about education. Young children are naturally curious and are constantly asking questions. They work tirelessly and joyfully, and even like methodically to figure out the world. And students, I think schools oftentimes train young people that having the right answer is the right way to go about learning, and rather questions are the things that we know open up new ideas and possible innovations. So when you really create an environment that is student-centered, that is driven by inquiry, it creates opportunities for students to pursue things that are of great interest to them. And naturally, when you're pursuing lines of inquiry, rather than kind of having a fixed mindset toward learning and closing doors as you go, student-centered learning or inquiry-based learning, which I think are different but very, very closely aligned. What it does is, as a student asks a question, it opens up this new line of thinking, which opens up new lines of thinking, which opens up new lines of thinking, which kind of creates this idea that learning is this continuous process that is open, and doing that in a way that really gives students agency, so that they feel, and this is where I think all 6 of these kind of come together. If we looked at these in terms of like a Venn diagram, when students have agency in their learning, all of a sudden it's going to become absolutely more relevant, and they're going to feel inspired to keep going. So I would talk a little bit more, but love to hear what you guys have to say, and then we could maybe bounce around more ideas.
I'm glad you hit on the topic of agency, because that's why student-centered learning is so important to me. In a lower school, what we often see, sadly, is kids that need a lot of affirmation that they're doing the right thing and answering the questions correctly. And to me, real student-centered learning is very empowering. To be able to say to a kid, I've given you all the tools that you need. You tell me what you think is the best thing to do now. Or in one of my classes I do once a week with the fifth graders, they have an online menu of activities that they can choose from. And we go through what those activities are, but the choice is up to them, what they pursue and how long they spend on it. And that alone changes their thinking about their role in the classroom. It gives them a sense of ownership and pride in the work that they're choosing to do. I think it's almost like they love it just because they chose it.
If you compelled them to do the very same thing, they'd love it less, I suspect.
Right. Yeah. And it's not you, it literally is. It's not you have to, it's you get to.
Yeah.
I think the agency is a really good point about like, and also building those skills from them being able to choose from sort of a menu of options to developing the skills to create their own learning experiences and learning opportunities. And I think the student-centered also really caught my eye because that's a lot of what I do in here is moving the kids in, preschool and kindergarten to choosing a way of implementing some, like a prompt that I've kind of given them to in the upper division in our middle school. They're really developing their own project ideas with much, much less scaffolding. So that skill building is a really fun part of my job and a really fun part of modern learning, I think.
It also, around being student-centered, it also strikes me that, for a new teacher, I know this is true of me in my first years in the classroom, you want to bring all of your preparation to bear as a professional, right? And so I was probably guilty of restricting the students because I wanted to do the work very well myself, in terms of laying out the resources for them and structuring things just so, et cetera. When the reality is that I think, at least as a more experienced teacher, the work was extricating myself from the learning a bit more.
Right.
So
Well, that actually, Jason, that makes me think of number 3 then, the means for assessing learning, because I think all of us in those early teaching days, we had this predefined outcome for what the product was going to be, and that the product was evidence of whether or not kids understood the content. And now I think when we rethink assessments and just keeping it in the most simplified terms, when we're talking about, just formative assessments, now evidence of learning can be about where do we go next? Where can the child choose to go next? How can the child evaluate what he or she understood about the experience, so that it provides the next steps, so that assessment really is about growth and not about a culminating event that is defined by a letter grade and we move on and it's too bad, so sad.
One of the things that I think has been really exciting in using, really focusing on standards-based assessment, which we've done at our school, and we've defined sort of 3 categories upon which to assess students, and this is not kind of novel to Nueva, but 1, like what's the content that you know. 2, what's the skills and practices that you're able to sort of incorporate into your work, and C, 3, habits of learning. What are your sort of dispositions toward learning? And what's really exciting, I think, toward as the semester goes on or as the year goes on, naturally differentiates in terms of what students are showing exemplary work in. And by the end of the semester, oftentimes we're saying not only are you designing your own project, we're asking students to design their own project, but to design what the project, what skills or content or habits are going to be assessed on that project. And so we're letting the students pick based on what are the things that each individual kid needs to work on, because they're all in different places and they all have different needs. And I think what seems so exciting to me about that is it's beginning, it's sort of like the first steps towards flipping the paradigm. And we've talked, we've all read and probably talked about this in one way or another, but sort of flipping the paradigm between time being constant and learning being variable to learning being constant and time being variable. That what we want to know is that when someone sort of walks out of a space, like we know what the things that we know what they can do, we know their sort of habits in learning, and the student knows these are the things that I now need to work on moving forward. So yeah, to your point, Jamie, I think assessment becomes really forward-looking rather than backward-looking, which is exactly what we want in terms of lifelong learning.
We're in our GOA courses seeing that the shift towards mastery learning is, whether consciously or subconsciously, is becoming a shift away from summative assessment toward formative assessment and toward more reflection on one's own skills and goal setting for future learning. And it's producing some really interesting results. That seems like a good spot to transition to the second question, which is how does your school design around these elements of modern learning? Like, what are the practices in place? What are the structures in place at your school to assure that you are getting this kind of modern learning experience for your students? And I'm sure, like any school, there's probably spots where we feel like we're doing that really well, and other places where we're frustrated and wish we could do it better. But be curious to know what's going on for everybody.
I guess I think a big part for us is that we do have a lot of support throughout the school to help teachers develop these kind of student-centered, open-ended projects. With me being in our makerspace, and then we also have a teacher coach, and we have a science and math specialist in the primary division. And I think if we are collaborating as teachers, we're really modeling that kind of collaboration for the kids, and it also brings all those benefits that collaboration brings. And so we're able to support each other, because for a lot of teachers, it's a pretty new way of thinking about how to support kids. And so the more that we can work together, open our classroom doors, the more we really are able to bring modern learning to the kids.
We recently hired a new head of school who will, I think, be, I'm 99% sure that he's going to be pushing a lot more of these ideas, these philosophies, school-wide, which is exciting. So it's pretty new, just like you were saying, to a lot of our teachers here. And what we, I think, have to focus on now is creating the collegial environments that need to be present in order for real collaboration to actually happen. So we're taking steps to get some folks some professional development around critical friends, and really we have to prep the soil first before we can grow anything new.
Yeah, so thinking about this question, the Nueva Upper School is only 5 years old, so we've had a chance to kind of think from scratch about, like, what are some of the things that we want to design at the upper school that allow for some of these elements of modern learning. And I think I'll talk one about program and one about facilities. Before launching the upper school, we spent about 4 years researching leading independent schools and also going to universities to kind of look at what are the trends happening for incoming freshmen in universities, how are they doing? And what we heard over and over again was that, some disturbing news around mental health and alcoholism, which was worth us paying attention to. But focusing more on academics, we heard this trend towards students having little idea of what they cared about, a little idea of what they wanted to study. And we're operating on a 24-hour cycle. So what I mean by that is, a student goes to class, teacher gives them some sort of lecture, some kind of experience, kid goes home, does homework, comes back the next day, they kind of close that loop and restart a new loop. And because of that, what we were hearing, sort of kind of loud trends, is that students had no idea how to sustain a project over time. And in part, not just like the productivity measure, but also the emotional connection toward working on something over time. So programmatically, we designed, sort of extended something out of our 8th grade. We call it our Quest project, but what this is a year-long kind of student-driven project where we spend the first couple months with students kind of like developing a really interesting question that the kid comes up with, matching them with an expert in the field outside of the school to be their resource. And the kid is intended to, is expected to spend somewhere between, 50 to 70 hours over the course of the year, kind of digging into this question and coming up with new ideas. And it's not product-based, it's process-based. But what's exciting about it is it happens every year. By the time kids enter 10th grade, we know that students have sustained a project over the course of a year, both in terms of managing their time and managing their emotional experience with it, so that when in a, whether it's a math class or a science class, English class, we can assign these 3 or 4 week projects, and we know that they have the emotional maturity and the academic maturity to break this down into its parts and to sustain it. And then, so that's sort of like a program. Facilities wise, when we built this is maybe a small thing, but I think is important in terms of like rethinking time and schedule. We built 3 labs that never have classes run in them. And the purpose of these labs is for students to design their own experiments, because we know that like real experiments that will lead to novel solutions aren't things that can be set up and taken down in 70 minutes. Oftentimes they will take weeks, months, years. And if we want to encourage our students to see themselves as active participants in a field, to see themselves as scientists rather than just people that are learning science, which I think is a subtle but huge and profound difference. We want to make sure that they have the space and time to engage in projects that would allow them to. We don't want facilities essentially to be the ceiling in their learning.
Right. I think one of the big questions around modern learning is how can we make it so that schedule and facilities are not the drivers of learning process, which I think all too often they become in traditional school settings.
Mm-hmm.
That was the one of the 6 elements that I think caught my attention the most, was the one about fostering rethinking time and schedule, because looking at the other 5, I think, a lot of schools are doing really good work around those 5, and they're not easy by any means, but I think we're making really good progress in them. But that last one is just a real stickler. Our makerspace, it sounds like, is kind of similar to y'all's labs, Mike, that there aren't any classes that are based in here, but they're used. It's used on a more as needed basis when kids have projects or when teachers want to bring kids in to work on projects. But we do still have that schedule. And if the kids are doing something really amazing in social studies in 6th grade, at the end of that 45 minutes, they have to put it away. And even if they're really deep into it, kind of the one piece that we've been able to do to really get away from that and kind of experiment with it is this is our 6th year of doing something that we call Adventure Days, where for our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, we cancel classes for 2 days and they work on a project that they've been developing over the previous 2 months. And so our Adventure Days are actually this Thursday and Friday. And so the kids have been planning their projects, getting their materials, working with staff to develop their idea. And I think that's really the coolest thing that we've done to experiment with time and schedule, but it's 2 days out of the entire school year. And how can we break up that schedule and facilities and use time more for what the kids want to learn and need to learn when they need it, rather than according to the schedule we've made for them.
How old are the kids doing that, Lindsay?
6th, 7th, and 8th grade, so middle school.
Yeah, I've worked with an awful lot of upper school teachers who would claim that 9th and 10th graders can't do that. So that's
Yeah, and actually a bunch of folks were claiming that even like 4th and 5th graders can't do it, but we just, for the first time at the beginning of January, did kind of a similar thing with our 4th and 5th grade. It was a little bit more scaffolded. They didn't have like wide open choice in what they wanted to do for their projects, but they had 2 full days to work on a small group project. And those 4th and 5th graders worked like crazy those 2 days and made enormous progress and learned. And I think we're more and more proving that kids don't need this like one period of math every day, one period of Spanish every day. Like they really benefit from those big chunks of time.
Yeah, I think it's so critical that at the core of educators is a deep optimism and trust that young people want to learn. I've heard too frequently schedules being designed so as to curb the one or two kids that might not engage in something.
Mm-hmm.
When I see sort of like what you just described sounds in many ways just like a scaled out version of a student-centered classroom. Now it's a student-centered schedule, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
in the same way that a teacher needs to, at that, the first time when they kind of give up control, be like, wow, I don't know how this is going to go. Like, such is the case when you free up time in that way. But I think examples of schools that have done that are showing results that are just truly, amazing in terms of kids engaging in purposeful work that they're doing, really important stuff with.
I think primary is such a great example of that, because in self-contained primary classrooms, they might have a schedule that says at this time we're going to do math, at this time we're going to do language arts, but anytime they're able to say, you know what, we're going to work all day on this science project because I got the kids all day anyway, so I can. And that goes away in middle school and in high school when they start specializing. It's kind of heartbreaking. And I don't know what the solution is, but what we're doing right now is not it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Lindsay, because I've heard like high quality progressive education being sort of a pre-K pedagogy with academic, with appropriate academics.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We should all be teaching kindergarten all the time. Just calculus thrown in.
So I'll just ask Mitch Resnick over at the what's the book? Lifetime.
Is that the Lifelong Kindergarten?
Yeah. But his platform, Scratch, for sort of introducing young kids.
Yeah.
My first grader is in love with. Would do for hours. So here's the question, the last question, and we'll take it where it goes. Let's imagine you're a teacher working. That your school isn't necessarily moving towards modern learning as we've laid it out here. You're passionate about it. What are the things that you're thinking about experimenting with on the edges, doing in your context, and maybe bring others on board? How do you approach that? I'm sure we all have the perfect answer ready.
I think what I've learned is you can't offer advice unless it's really asked for. And you have to listen all the time. And even when you think you might be getting cues that you can start a conversation with someone about something that may be a little outside of their comfort zone, you have to watch their body language. You have to watch the facial expressions that they make, because it's, moving toward more modern centered learning is, I heard, who's the coach that's out of Jim Knight said that, teaching is very personal, and we don't know what we do. Like, we don't know what we look like as teachers. And so, in my role here, I am as the outsider, and I see have a different lens for teaching and learning, and it's not the same lens. And so I first have to make sure that teacher knows I deeply understand and empathize with their lens before I can ask them to put on mine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They have to trust me.
I think just like how we say relationship is the most important thing with the kids, it's true with colleagues as well. Like, if people have to believe that we're all on the same side, they have to believe that you think that they're amazing. They're already an amazing educator. I'm not trying to tell you that you're bad. I think you're awesome. And if they don't believe that, they're not going to listen. They're not going to want to collaborate.
Yeah.
I was thinking sort of along the same lines. The book that first popped to mind was Rob Evans's The Human Side of School Change, which is all around relationship building and relationship tending, and thinking really about how do you get over the fear that is attached to any change initiative. I was also thinking about I think Peter Senge uses this idea of an elastic band in this way to think about change. So, like if here's where you are and you're trying to get up here, you need someone who has the idea to get there. What is that place that you're going? But if all you're doing is talking about this idea and you're unable to anchor people to the place where they are right now, you're not going to get people to come along. So much of change management is really about anchoring this initiative into who the school has always been, the mission of the school, the expertise in the room, but then providing this inspiring vision toward what's the next version of who you already are. And I think I feel like that's a really important thing that we've thought about as we've kind of continued to think about innovation in education here at Nueva. We don't want to be the school that's just constantly chasing the shiny objects, because that leads to innovation fatigue really quickly. But rather, like, knowing who we are, how does where we're going help us do what we've always done, but better or in a new way? And when you can articulate it, I think, effectively in that manner, that's when that sort of like that elasticity of the band, back to the image that Peter Senge uses, really can drive and move a whole organization or group of folks with you.
That feels like a good place to stop. I want to thank our three panelists for taking the time to talk with us all today. And I hope that the folks in the Modern Learning Lab course really enjoy.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.